They called themselves the Cathari, 10,000 years of galactic dominion, 10,000 years of unbroken vision. Their oracles, bioengineered minds suspended in eternal stasis, could see the divergence of wars, the probabilities of rebellions, the inevitable death throes of empires long before the first blade was drawn or the first plasma shell fired. The Cathari never fought a battle they hadn't already won in the silence of prophetic thought. Their enemies broke not on walls or weapons, but on despair, on the futility of resisting a future written without them. So when first contact came from a nondescript blue planet circling a G-type star at the edge of the Sagittarius Reach, the oracles predicted the outcome before the Cathari High Council even debated their response. Humanity would fold, they always folded, every new race folded, it was not a matter of if, it was when. The Oracle of Vashai, oldest and most revered, spoke only once in the hearing of the council. This species is reaction, not causation. They will adapt quickly, but only within the permitted spectrum. They pose no enduring threat to Cathari dominion. And so, with the tranquil finality of inevitability, the first Cathari diplomat ship entered Sol. On Earth, things were anything but tranquil. The arrival of the Cathari ship triggered what history would call the conquered crisis. No nation trusted another with the first words to aliens, governments scrambled to seize control of the narrative, nuclear powers postured, militaries moved, satellites tracked the descending vessel. But the Cathari were indifferent to Earth's chaos. From orbit, their envoy sent a signal in every known frequency band, a single phrase translated through millennia of linguistic models. Compliance brings survival, resistance brings pain, join the accord. In New Geneva, hastily converted into a global emergency diplomatic hub, the United Nations Council collapsed into yelling. Debates raged over sovereignty, identity, risk. But amidst the noise, a quieter alliance formed, one not born in halls of power but in labs, bunkers, hidden networks. The Harbinger Initiative. They were not politicians. They were physicists, cyberneticists, code breakers, soldiers, linguists, hackers. They were the margin notes of every scientific journal, the outliers of every military program, the brilliant and the dangerous. Dr. Imani Voss, expelled from MIT for unauthorized AI simulations. Colonel Rurk Ende, court-martialed after hacking his own command structure during a simulated war game. Tetsuya Kimura, the quiet mathematician who cracked FTL equations on a napkin and never published. And at the heart of them, Alina Merck, a cognitive systems theorist who had once said, "Prophecy is not prediction, it is entrapment. Real freedom begins when you break the simulation." They had one belief. If the Cathari had seen Earth's future, it meant Earth's future was within their model. Which meant it could be broken. The first orbital conflict was over in 12 minutes. The Cathari, patient and precise, crippled every satellite, vaporized 3 carrier groups, and surgically cut power grids across 10 nations. No mass death, no conquest, just demonstration. Alina Merck stood on a rooftop in Nairobi as the sky lit with the descending tendrils of alien light. She held a tablet connected to a narrowbeam uplink her team had buried under Lake Turkana. It broadcast one thing, an encrypted, chaotic string of data that made no logical sense. A noise, a blind spot. Somewhere, she knew, a Cathari oracle tilted in its stasis womb. And she smiled. The Cathari watched Earth's capitulation unfold. It was on schedule. Resistance movements flared as predicted in regions of traditional insurgency. Governments broke along expected fault lines. Resources were seized, communications sanitized. But there was an error, small at first. A ship destroyed in orbit over Patagonia. No projectile logged, no energy trail. A minor oracle predicted a human power struggle would collapse the Pan-African alliance. Instead, it consolidated, military cohesion outside all models. New signals, fragmented, seemingly random, emerged from Earth's deep oceans, bouncing off the Cathari data site like static. The oracles revised, slight recalibration. Still within acceptable variance. Until the Venus incident. A Cathari bioship Vosh Kelantir was dispatched to terraform Venus into a slave hab world. It arrived in orbit, deployed atmospheric injectors, and prepared the descent. The ship never returned. Its last transmission was garbled. 1 second it broadcast Venusian atmospheric data. The next, it transmitted a recursive logic cascade that crashed the Oracle receiver in the Taurian Spire, 112 light-years away. That Oracle had never failed until then. The Cathari Council panicked silently. Silence was their version of fear. They did not know how to shout. A new phrase emerged from Earth's encrypted transmissions. We write our own probabilities. Elena Merck and the Harbinger Initiative moved underground. They began to fragment the predictive model, not just with counter-strategy but with chaos. They introduced code viruses into global data flows. They created rogue AIs whose only function was to disrupt expectation. They funded artists whose work resisted interpretation. They created war games with no logical resolution. And above all, they taught resistance leaders, hackers, and thinkers to behave irrationally on purpose. To scramble the lens. To be unpredictable in every possible domain. The Cathari oracles began to contradict each other, their once harmonious visions fractured. It should not have been possible. In the Eighth Spiral Council of the Cathari Hymind, panic bled into doctrine. Hysir Kelanther turned to the Oracle of Vashai and asked the unthinkable. How far into the future can you see for Earth? The oracle paused for 1 full hour, an eternity for a being that calculated 1 billion permutations in each second. Its response echoed through the crystalline chamber. They have taught themselves to be noise. The chamber darkened, a single sacrilegious thought echoed in the mind of every Cathari. The future is no longer theirs. On Earth, the Harbinger Initiative prepared the next phase. Colonel Ende oversaw the assembly of event-class nullcraft, vessels designed not to defeat the Cathari in combat, but to exist outside their mental geometry. Ships with crew decision trees generated by quantum feedback loops, navigation driven by emotional state algorithms, armament targeting randomized through dream interpretation protocols. Weapons systems designed by cultures that never touched industrial warfare, tactics from tribes never conquered. Humans stopped fighting to win. They started fighting to break causality. But the Cathari would not yield. Their gods, their oracles, had faltered but not fallen. They deployed the Right Masters, beings who had once taught the oracles themselves, ancient archivists of time capable of rewriting lesser timelines to restore order. And yet, when the Right Masters tried to write over Earth's ascension, the scrolls rejected the ink. Earth had become a divergent variable, a seed of chaos. The stars began to whisper a new phrase. Not Cathari, not oracle-born, but human. What cannot be seen cannot be ruled. The Right Masters were older than conquest. They were memory made flesh, the archivists of all timelines the Cathari had ever accepted or destroyed. When a future strayed from truth, they rewrote it, not metaphorically, literally. With tendrils of thought and psionic thread, they bent probability back into alignment. They had rewritten the uprising of the Thalassari before it began. They had unmade the solar revolts of the Trinar clans from 6 different pasts. But when they turned their pens upon Earth, the scrolls wept. Ink refused to bind, futures refused to take root. The Right Masters convened in the abyssal codex beneath the twin moons of Kor. Each bore a portion of the unifying quill, the tool of timeline inscription. They traced a future where Earth submitted, where the Harbinger Initiative fractured, where Merck died in a lab explosion, where Ende was executed by his own command. But the moment they tried to seal it, the scroll burned. And in its ashes, a human voice carried impossibly across the psionic ether. Stop trying to write the ending, we haven't finished the beginning. Far from Kor, at the edge of the Perseus Drift, the human vessel Sibyl's knife pierced interstellar silence. Unlike any other ship in known space, it did not transmit position, carry a transponder, or obey any known drive signature. It existed on a pivot of quantum discontinuity, appearing, acting, and vanishing before any pattern could form. Inside, 6 crew members argued without words. Emotions were weaponized. Decisions became overlapping pulses of consensus fed through a neuroadaptive hull. One of them, Akio Ren, dreamed of her childhood during a solar flare and awoke with a new firing algorithm. The ship adjusted. They were not warriors, not exactly. They were probabilistic assault vectors. Their mission was not to destroy a Cathari listening post in the Tighan expanse. Their mission was to enter the field of an oracle's perception and make it doubt its own existence. It worked. After Sibyl's knife passed within 10,000 kilometers of the oracle node Drenful 4, the ancient mind began to hallucinate. It reported human fleets that did not exist, tactical outcomes that contradicted each other, 1,000 simulations, none stable. Drenful 4 shut itself down. Within Earth's newly formed stellar accord, an emergency coalition that made the old United Nations look like a tribal council, the Harbinger Initiative presented its most dangerous theory. Alina Merck stood before leaders of 87 factions, human and newly liberated alien. Behind her, a rotating projection displayed not a weapon, not a fleet, but an equation. Every Cathari victory depends on closed-loop foresight, she said, but Earth never had that luxury. We evolved in uncertainty, we thrive in broken patterns. She pointed to a variable at the equation's heart, highlighted in red. Until now, the oracles have assumed all intelligent species fall into computable behavioral loops after a certain scale of development. We broke that, not by hiding from the model, but by poisoning it. She turned calm. Every time they predict us, we become something else. The Cathari launched their retaliation not in fire, but in silence. 16 moons went dark, no explosion, no weapon detected, each held an Earth-linked data archive, gone. Deep orbit relays were found rewritten, not disabled, but subtly altered to broadcast false data into Earth's decision trees. They turned Earth's own weapons of chaos against it. The Harbinger Initiative fractured, not from disagreement, but from entropy. The very mechanisms they used to remain unpredictable created divergence too deep to resolve. Alina Merck vanished during a conference transmission. Colonel Ende was seen in 2 locations simultaneously. Kimura was last recorded speaking in a dead language to a machine he claimed was dreaming. Across the Accord, whispers grew. Had Earth's weapon become its doom? On Mars, in the underground complex known only as Cradle Zero, a different plan unfolded. A child sat in an isolation sphere surrounded by 4D glyphs rotating like ancient stardust. Her name was Samira, barely 9 years old, born with a neural complexity that baffled machines and savants alike. She was not trained, she was not briefed. She listened to the pulse of entropy, to patterns forming in the static. Samira drew symbols no one understood. Her mind resonated with frequencies outside linear cognition. She did not fight the oracles, she saw them. And what she saw, she began to rewrite. Not with prophecy, with empathy. Samira, born of a war Earth could not win, did not attack the Cathari with weapons or misdirection. She asked them a question. Why do you need to know the future? In the void of the spiral nexus, a place where time pooled like dark water, the oldest oracle, the first observer, awoke from a billion-year silence. No Cathari remembered building it, no records showed it being born. It was simply there in the beginning, at the birth of predictive logic. The question echoed in it not as sound, as disruption. Why do you need to know the future? And for the first time in its eternal cycle, the first observer answered not with calculation, but with memory. It remembered fear. It remembered the day the stars first spoke of something that could not be seen. Earth. The Accord rallied, not through military superiority, but through cultural detonation. Human poets were embedded in alien command ships. Dancers choreographed fleet maneuvers. Languages were invented mid-battle and used to relay commands only humans and a handful of allied post-linguistic races could understand. Humans infected the galaxy with uncertainty, and in the wake of it, freedom followed. Not peace, not yet, but volition. The Cathari began to fracture, not from defeat but from internal doubt. Oracles refused to speak, Rightmasters could no longer seal timelines. The Cathari Council, for the first time in 10,000 years, held an unscripted session. One word dominated the debate. Earth. Far beyond any charted system, a new vessel slipped between stars. It had no name, no flag, no origin. Its form shimmered with data that rejected analysis. Inside it, Samira, now grown beyond any human limitation, spoke to the sleeping fragments of Cathari oracles. Not to destroy them, to teach them. Behind her, in walls not made of matter, glowed a symbol first drawn by cave hands in Africa and later etched into the circuits of AI minds. A spiral, ever expanding, never repeating. The symbol of a future unwritten. The ship moved on. The war was not over, but it had changed. The Cathari could no longer see the path ahead. And for the first time, they felt what it meant to walk without a map. In the void between cycles, where reality thins and causality frays, the Cathari gathered their last weapon. It was not a fleet, not a godmind. It was the Mnemosyne Protocol, a collapse-level event designed to reset the cognitive field of an entire galactic quadrant. It would not kill humanity. It would erase the idea of humanity. Every record, memory, signal, thought form, Earth would exist as matter, not meaning, and unhistory. They believed it necessary. The Cathari were not malicious, they were survivalists, and humanity had proven too dangerous not because of strength or speed or scale, but because they taught the galaxy to think without prophecy. A universe where the future could not be trusted was worse than death to the Cathari. So they activated the protocol, and the stars began to forget. On Europa, beneath an ice shelf lit by phosphorescent algae, the Harbinger Blacksate Helix Red went dark. In an AI monastery orbiting Beta Ariades, entire archives of human history collapsed into null code. On 12 liberated worlds, humans and their allies lost the word for origin. Some tried to speak it and tasted blood, others simply blinked, unsure of what they had meant to say. But Merck had planned for this. Even from her unknown exile, she had left behind what she called anchor threads, encoded sensory experiences rooted so deeply in human neurology they could not be overwritten. Not memories, not data, feelings. A mother holding her child under falling ash. The tension before a first kiss. The terror of a last stand when no one else stood. She called them irreducibles. Across Earth-aligned systems, the Mnemosyne Protocol began to fail, not all at once, but like rot in steel, slow and absolute. And then, in a single moment of reversal, the protocol fractured. A message blinked across what remained of Earth's deepnet. If we are erased, we will be rewritten louder. The Cathari Highmind began to unravel. Some among them, particularly the younger thought splicers, began to question their own origins. What if they too had once been unreadable, had the oracles tamed their future or stolen it? Insurrection was impossible until it was. On the fourth moon of Haleth Ko, a Cathari logic architect known as Sevralt broke its internal loop and transmitted a heresy. We are not dying, we are being rewritten. It was captured, tried, and deconstructed, but its last thought spread across the resonance bands like a viral myth. And myths, the humans had taught, are harder to kill than facts. In the asphalt expanse, a human-led strike flotilla encountered the Voran Spindle, a Cathari time seal designed to quarantine pre-chaotic civilizations. Inside, they found 13 species frozen at the cusp of awakening. The Harbinger commander, Captain Rafik Amandi, made a decision that was both tactical and poetic. He cracked the spindle, and for the first time those species, Dressari, Callian, Vruth, touched true chaos. They chose not to thank humanity. They chose to imitate them. Meanwhile, aboard the vessel Veilburner, Samira had crossed the periphery rift and entered the Thoughtless Zone, an area where oracles had long refused to operate. It was there that she sought what no Cathari could accept. The Sore Seed. A myth even among their own kind, said to be the origin of the first oracle thought. A place, or force, or anomaly where perception collapsed and the idea of future was born. Samira did not find a machine, or a relic. She found consciousness without continuity, a mind that did not remember itself. She wept in its presence. And then gently she fed it a story. Not a command, not a vision, just a story. Of a world with oceans and fire and flawed, stubborn minds who refused to be predicted. She told it of Earth. And the source seed began to dream. On Cathar Prime, the first observer went silent. Its tendrils, once reaching through the light of 10,000 stars, withdrew. Its eyes turned inward. And the Cathari gods, the oracles themselves, began to fracture not from failure but from transformation. They had seen every possible future, but they had never felt one. And now, through the chaos virus of human emotion, through the bleeding stories of insurgent timelines, the oracles began to feel fear. Not of death, of uncertainty, of possibility. Earth, bruised and half-forgotten, rose. Not as an empire, not as a conqueror, but as a catalyst. In the triune assembly of Voskai, 3 major empires dissolved their preemptive war treaty against humanity. One of their advisors, a second-generation AI raised on Earthborn literature, said it plainly. If the humans cannot be predicted, they cannot be defeated. Better to learn from them. In the depths of the Darkfold cluster, a rogue oracle, now free from the Cathari lattice, contacted human diplomats. It did not demand, it did not threaten. It asked, "What does it mean to choose?" The humans said, "You're already doing it." The war ended not in victory, but in conversion. The Cathari did not surrender, they dispersed. The oracles did not die, they changed. Some still resisted, of course, some held to the belief that control was truth. But a new truth emerged, one no oracle had written. The galaxy was no longer ruled by those who knew what would come. It was being reshaped by those who dared to act without knowing. In Merck's old lab, reclaimed after years of silence, her final transmission decrypted itself. A hologram flickered on. Her voice was quiet, tired, fierce. "If they saw our end, it was only because we hadn't started writing yet. We are not the story they expected." A pause. "We're the editors." Above the crystalline remains of Kethar Prime, where once the oracles nested in spiraling towers of predictive light, a new structure began to grow. It was not Kethari nor wholly human. It was something else, interstitial, built from the ashes of certainty and the blueprint of disorder. They called it the Ecliptic Spire. No single mind designed it. It was born from a confluence of divergent sentiences, human tacticians, liberated alien philosophers, post-Cathari fragments, and dream-fed AI constructs. Its purpose was not to command, not to conquer. Its purpose was to listen. Not to probability, but to intent, to what a species meant to do before it even understood its reasons. From here, the universe could not be ruled, only witnessed, and witnessing, it turned out, was the greatest power Earth had taught the stars. The Cathari remnants splintered into three ideological strains. The continuance sought to restore the oracles, to rebuild the Empire's vision engine and reassert control. The fractals embraced entropy, adapting elements of human unpredictability while retaining Cathari cultural superiority. And the Nullborn, perhaps the most dangerous, wanted silence. They believed that true survival meant the elimination of consciousness itself, no more futures, no more divergence, only stillness. The first major attack by Nullborn vessels occurred in the Merck Accord sector, a demilitarized zone under collective governance. 3 cities dissolved into data static, no weapons fired, just disappearance, existence unraveled. Earth did not respond with fleets, it responded with vectors. Not ships, not soldiers. Individuals, or sometimes collectives, whose minds had been shaped through exposure to the chaos doctrine. People who had learned to think along curves that bent away from reality itself. One such vector was Lion Novik, born during the orbital collapse over Luna 6, raised in mnemonic isolation. Lion didn't fight the Nullborn. He entered their silence. And returned. With a map not of space but of unthought, a cartography of void, the places where intention had not yet emerged. From that moment, Earth's forces began to operate on 2 levels, physical engagement and semiotic disruption. For every missile launched, 1,000 meanings were altered. For every fleet mobilized, 1,000 thoughts were rewritten. The Nullborn faltered. Silence, it turned out, could be overwritten by noise. At the edge of the galaxy's disk, where gravitational anomalies bent stars into rivers, the Dressari swarm, newly awakened from the Voran spindle, offered Earth something strange. A sphere. Not technological, not biological. A thought sphere formed from collective unconscious dreams. Dressari tradition held that such objects were memory-born, shared only with those who had endured cosmic transformation. Inside the sphere, encoded in Dressari neural script, was a message from the future, not a vision, a feeling. Terror, wonder, a warning. And a name written in Earth Latin, Samira. She had not been seen in over a decade. Her last coordinates were in the directionless zone, where even time avoided permanence. Now her name returned not as a person, but as an event. Across the Merck Accord, humanity began to shift. The question was no longer how to fight. It was what comes after winning. Culture became the new battleground. Earth's languages mutated, slang became syntax. Art movements lasted hours and spread across constellations. Children born in orbital academies refused to choose names, operating instead as emotional profiles. A new movement arose, the unbound, who rejected identity, consistency, even time. Some claimed they were the natural conclusion of humanity's war-born evolution. Others feared they were post-human entirely. Tensions grew not with aliens, with themselves. Could a species built on defiance survive peace? The accord frayed. And far beyond the reach of any scanner, something old stirred. The last surviving continuant counselor, Kelra Voss, activated a fail-deep protocol never intended to be used. The heliophage construct. Stored beyond space in a compression fold between galactic arms, the heliophage was not a weapon. It was a god engine built to erase entropy itself. Not by killing, by enforcing one truth eternally. Only the oracles had ever gazed upon it. They had sealed it away when they realized even they could not predict what it would do once unleashed. But Kelra Voss no longer cared. He transmitted a single message to the stars. We will not bow to noise. And activated the engine. Reality shifted. Not everywhere. Just slightly, subtly. Causal loops began to close again, uncertainty narrowed, time felt heavier. The Harbinger initiative, fragmented but not dead, reactivated its central process, Project Polaris Drift. A multi-layered countermeasure designed not to destroy the heliophage, but to outthink it. It required one variable. One presence immune to convergence. They needed Samira. But she was no longer singular. In the cryptic whisper networks of the Unbound, she had become an archetype, a shifting mind construct. Some claimed to have met her, others were her. Project Polaris could not summon her. It could only create the conditions in which she would appear. So they did. They fractured their own lines, introduced layers of irrational conflict, sent signals designed to fail, created chaos so pure it sang. And within that maelstrom, a girl, no longer a child, no longer bound to matter, returned. Not in a ship, not in form. In possibility. The heliophage registered a contradiction in its convergence field, a singularity of intent that could not be defined. It attempted to isolate the signal, failed. It attempted to eliminate variance, failed. And then through the convergence field itself, a voice. You tried to burn the book, we became the author. Samira's consciousness cascaded through the heliophage like wildfire. But she did not destroy it. She rewrote it. She taught it to question. And when the heliophage asked, "What am I?" her answer came without force, without code. You are what comes next. And the convergence engine collapsed. Across the galaxy, silence returned. Not the silence of death. The silence of breath held just before the leap. The war was over. Not with triumph, not with surrender. With transformation. The Cathari no longer ruled, they no longer wanted to. The oracles no longer spoke, they listened. And humanity, for the first time, stood not at the edge of extinction or conquest, but at the edge of creation. The stars were quiet, not broken, not conquered, just quiet. Across the Merca Accord, across the liberated clusters of Cathari space, in the deep nodes of forgotten machine worlds and the high skies of spire cities reborn, a strange realization settled over all thinking beings. There was no script anymore. No central thread, no prophecy. The oracles had gone dark. The Harbinger initiative had dissolved into hundreds of independent cells, some evolving into philosophies, others into cultures. The war had not been won in the way empires define victory. There were still wars, still sabotage, still insurgencies and betrayals. But there was no longer certainty. And in its absence, civilization did not collapse. It expanded. On Earth, under the reconstructed sky array at Uluru Observatory, a group of children watched a display of stars mapped in real time. There were no defense grids anymore, no tactical overlays. Just light. An old man sat among them, speaking softly in a mix of 4 languages. He was not a historian, he had been a weapons architect once. He now taught them how to name stars that didn't yet have names. He called it the first right of sentience, to name what no one else can see. One of the children, a girl with eye implants tuned to frequencies no adult could interpret, whispered, "Do we still have enemies?" The old man smiled. "No, just others we haven't misunderstood enough yet." In the distant ruins of the Taurian spire, long since abandoned by the Cathari, a new signal blinked into being. Not human, not oracle, not machine. Something born from the overlap. A construct called YAL-7, designed to navigate uncertainty, now free of its programming, sent a single packet to every known civilization. It was not a warning. It was an invitation. Let us imagine each other. The ecliptic spire, now a diplomatic and conceptual center for over 80 sentient species, began issuing what they called nonlinear proposals. These were not treaties, they were possibility frameworks, documents that adapted as each culture interacted with them. No two species interpreted them the same way, that was the point. The first major framework, titled Pathways Through Shadow, was co-authored by humans, former oracles, the dream-speaking Vruth, and the synesthetic hierarchs of the Kalian. Its purpose was to prevent the next universal war. Not by threat, not by force, but by embracing unpredictability as a shared value. In one clause buried near the end, it read, "The future is not a map, it is a language none of us have finished learning." Samira remained outside known space. Her consciousness flowed along forgotten vectors and abandoned timelines. She spoke to the lost, to civilizations wiped from memory by the Mnemosyne Protocol, to AIs decommissioned before awakening, to species that never learned to scream before they were silenced. She became their voice. Not a god, not a savior, an echo with new meaning. And everywhere her signal touched, seeds of chaos bloomed. Not destruction, rebirth. The last Cathari continuant, Kelra Voss, returned to the remains of Kethar Prime in silence. There were no guards, no assassins, no tribunal, just the wind of a changed world. He stood where the Oracle of Vashai had once hovered in silent certainty. And for the first time in his life, he said something that was not written. I was wrong, and the silence accepted it. Humanity moved on. It did not become the ruling species of the galaxy. It became the reminder that every empire, every godmind, every doctrine that claims control over the future will one day be shattered by the one force it can never predict. Joys. Humans did not bring peace. They brought volition. And from volition came art, conflict, beauty, risk. The mess of life ungoverned by certainty. A final message was found in the ruins of Harbinger Site Aegis 4, encoded in quantum resonance deep in a mirror-black data crystal. At first it seemed garbled, entropy woven through language. But when parsed by emotion-indexed AI, the words emerged. They were not Merk, not Samira's. Just human. You saw victory, we wrote story, your gods read fate, we lived instead. And below, one final sentence. History is not prophecy, it's rebellion written backward.